Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and welcome to this novel in verse reading vlog. I'm going to be reading 5 novels in verse over the course of this vlog and telling you my thoughts about them. I've kind of hit a bit of a standstill with writing my own novel in verse, so I'm hoping this is going to jumpstart me with some inspiration to continue writing in 2021. So right before we jump into reading some novels in verse and discussing those novels in verse, I would like to tell you about bookstagrammers.com. So bookstagrammers.com is a website that's actually for bookstagrammers, book bloggers and booktubers, and it's made for connecting brands with book content creators so that you can get paid and work with them and collaborate, and it's for all of us. No matter the number of followers, no matter where you are in the world, you can all join bookstagrammers.com. It's absolutely free to join and there are no mediations. You are paid 100% what you make, and it's simply a website because it's time for book content creators, and I'm sure as many of you will agree, in this industry we do quite a lot of work and it's time for us to be paid for the work that we are doing. I personally myself first heard about bookstagram.com on Bookstagram, and since then I have joined bookstagram.com and I've been using it and I've been able to easily understand everything. So I really recommend, if you're thinking of making a little bit of money from what you do as a content creator, as a bookish content creator, and you've got either of those 3 platforms, head over to bookstagrammers.com and join. I'll leave a link to it down below. The first book that I've chosen for me to start reading is The Black Flamingo by Atta. I've chosen this one because of the fact that it's just been getting so much hype on booktube last year, and I did really want to read it last year but it just slipped through my fingers, so I'm looking forward to starting this one later on today. Well, I read all of The Black Flamingo. I started reading it yesterday and then I finished reading it this morning. I just couldn't stop reading. It was so good. It was my first 5-star read of this year. I'm gonna do a flip through after this just to show you what the pages look like, because there's these little cute illustrations and there's poetry included in this one, and I thought it just added so well to the book. Have I told you what this book is about? So I feel like it's people give a synopsis that doesn't quite fit it, because they talk about the fact that it's about a guy who goes to uni and he's gay and he discovers drag and feels like he very much fits into the community there, and it's about finding himself through the drag community. But that was kind of halfway into the book. It actually starts from when he's very young and it kind of goes through his life when it comes to questioning, when it comes to accepting himself, and it has a lot to just do with identity. I would say the big theme of this book is identity and finding out who you are, and I really liked it. I thought it was just something I could relate to so very much, and you know, I'm not a gay man and yet I could relate to this one. I thought it did the cultural representation very well. So we have our main character who's mixed race, and he talks about the fact that he calls himself black, but then there's people are like, you're not black enough or you're not white enough. He's also Jamaican, Greek, and also has been born in Britain and grows up in Britain, and he talks about how he doesn't feel like he fits into any culture in particular. He can't speak Greek, he doesn't know that much about Jamaican, and he doesn't quite always feel 100% British, so he's just trying to figure out like who he is, what this means for him, what it's like to be a black man, the assumptions that people make, the internalized and the obvious and outward homophobia and racism he experiences in his life. And it was just such a good discussion on all of those things without any of them being like a forced narrative. It's really about him finding himself, finding what it means to love himself and love the people around him. It was just so heartwarming. The build up to the main event at the end was just so well paced and so well done, and that final scene there literally just stole my whole heart. It was exploding, it was like fireworks within me. It was so fantastic. I was relating to some of these small moments and some different things. For example, not the bad feeling, but the kind of I don't fit in feeling I experienced when I went to the African Caribbean Society in university, when I felt like I was so excited to go to African Caribbean Society, having been one of the few black people in the Netherlands in my school when I grew up. I think there was only one other black person who was graduating in my year. I was excited for it, and then it was such a huge disappointment, and I could relate to some of his feelings in this about being of loads of identities. I am Jamaican British, but I grew up in the Netherlands, so I feel like I have all of those identities within me, and some are more dominant in some ways than others, and it's just very interesting seeing that combination. And because 2 of his identities are Jamaican British, I could relate to a lot of those things. I think It had so many wonderful things to say about being part of the LGBT plus community, feeling queer enough or not queer enough. Of course, I can't speak on those matters myself. I really liked how poetry was included in this one. What I thought was even more wonderful about it was that when he's a child writing the poetry, I wasn't a big fan of the poetry. I was like, it's not the best. But as he grows up, the poetry matures with him and actually gets better as you go along. And I feel like that's very realistic. A lot of the ones about people becoming poets and that include poetry start off with brilliant poetry from the beginning, and as a poet myself I can tell you that's not how it goes, so I like seeing that progression. There was just so much I really liked about this. Such a brilliant novel in verse, and as I've mentioned I think in this video that I was stuck with writing my own novel in verse, that I was just feeling a bit stuck, and also as a poet I haven't written poetry in quite a while. This pandemic sucked all of the poetic words from my body, but as soon as I finished reading this one I went upstairs into my room and I wrote my first poem in a very long time, and I really like the result of that poem, and I feel like this book, I owe it to this book for giving me the poetry vibes, but I also had an idea for how I want to structure and write my next chapter of my novel in verse, so I'm excited because today I'm going to write another chapter of my novel in verse. It worked. Reading a novel in verse has inspired me to keep writing my own novel in verse and up my motivation. Very happy about that. Okay, so I'm just back briefly, because I chose that my next novel in verse that I'll be reading is Other Words for Home by Jasmine Warga. If you watched my best books of 2020 list, you know that Jasmine Warga totally ruined me with My Heart and Other Black Holes, so I'm looking forward to getting to this book. It's also the first middle grade novel in verse I'm ever reading before. Not read one of those, and I'm curious to see what it's going to be like, and unlike with the Black Flamingo, I'll tell you what it's about right now. So in this one we follow our main character, who is a young girl, and she lives in Syria with her mum, brother and father, but the last thing she expected was having to flee Syria and go to Cincinnati for safety reasons, and she goes there with her mum while her dad and brother stay behind in Syria, and it's about her adjusting to her new life in America and some of the labels that she receives, like Middle Eastern, that she's not expected, and she doesn't know how to process all of this. So I think it's going to be one that's going to be emotionally heavy, just judging from My Heart and Other Black Holes. Look who it is! It's me! I've been reading Other Words for Home, and I'm halfway through now, and I'm feeling a lot of emotions. I feel like in the beginning it took me a little bit of time to warm up to the book, not because I wasn't enjoying it, just because it wasn't blowing me away yet. I should have probably put the dust jacket on it. Hold the dust jacket in front of it. That's a good alternative, right? And I was just relating so much to this character because she's had to leave her home and she's had to leave her family and move away, and of course she's had to do it under circumstances that I cannot relate to, that I don't know if I'll ever be able to relate to, but not circumstances that I can relate to, and she speaks a language that is different from the place where she's going to, so she's struggling with that language, and I appreciate seeing her struggle with English simply because I feel like we don't see that many bilingual characters who are not familiar with their second language yet, and I appreciated seeing that. Also, the Black Flamingo had a lot about language, which I also find pretty interesting, that both of the novels in verse, which have to do with identity and culture, focus on language quite a bit. Novels in verse are such identity books. It's just pushing all the themes I like in novels in verse. Okay, that was a tangent, but let's get back to the point that I was going to talk about. And of course not her whole family moves to America, so I think her dad and her father, I don't think I know, her dad and her father stay in Syria, and her mum and her are over there in America, and she is worrying about these family members all of the time. Like every moment of every day she is thinking about these family members that are not with her, and she is a child, okay? This is a heavy weight for immigrants to carry. I was feeling it throughout this book, and then it just hit me like, wow, people live like that every day. This is people's everyday life. It's not the most creative use of the novel in verse format. I feel like in some novels in verse you get a very creative use with it, or you get a very creative use with illustrations. I feel like this one is more straightforward, but I feel like it's a good place for if you're easing your way into novels in verse, simply because the style is, you know, more approachable than the more creatively styled novels in verse. Okay, I think that's all I've got to say for halfway, but I'm really liking it. Oh, I can see it won an honor award because there's the stamp like right in the middle of the cover, but I feel like it's probably going to be deserving of that award, and I'm curious to see where it's going to go by the end of it. Really liking this. I'm in this slightly uncomfortable position to tell you about the rest of Other Words for Home, which I just finished. I read this all in one day. It was wonderful. My reading year is off to such a good start with so many good novels in verse. I just think novels in verse are one of my favourite things to read. I am biased, but I don't care. And I want to tell you 3 more things about this, and then I'll save the rest for my wrap up. The first being that it's really about this girl being told that she can't take up space in certain places and kind of asserting her own idea of what it means to take up space. As the title says, Other Words for Home, she's trying to figure out what home means. I think that's a better way of saying it. She's trying to figure out what home means to her, especially as someone who's moved somewhere else in very different circumstances to other people who move, and I thought that was all very well done. It also talks about something that I think is such an important thing to discuss, and that is how people are not monoliths. And I think when it comes to a lot of Islamophobia, racism, lots of hate towards certain groups of people, it's because they get this idea that if one Muslim person does something that they disagree with, it's all Muslims. And it's like, that is not true. That's not valid. Each person is individual. White people are granted that individuality. We need to remember that not all people are, like, not a single person is a monolith for all people who have that belief or who have that idea or who have that ethnic group. That's not the case, and I like that it digs into this deeper. But also it's really interesting to see that this is about a child, and she picks up on the Islamophobia, the xenophobia, the hate towards her, and she doesn't understand it, and she wants to know why people feel this way. And it's just so sad seeing this child who should just be going to school, just enjoying her life, have to deal with these very hard and very tough questions and deal with these things that adults are yelling at her and saying to her. And it just makes me so disappointed that, you know, she's had to wise up, and wow, this girl is strong, she is smart, she is wise, but she shouldn't need to be that wise. The younger generation shouldn't need to be as intelligent as they are these days, because adults should be taking responsibility. Adults should be getting their lives together so that children can enjoy their childhood. And I think this book also shows that wonderfully. It shows so many things wonderfully. It gets a bit emotional. It's Jasmine Warga who wrote this book. Of course, we're going to get emotional at some points, and the end just had my heart exploding. Again, Black Flamingo, this book, explosions are happening. They're happening here. Hello, it's another day, and apparently we're going for the Olivia Savannah kneels on the floor and talks about books aesthetic. So I totally forgot to give you an update before, but I'm over halfway through Blood Paint Water. I was looking at the other 2 options, and I knew that those 2 were sad books, and I was having a bit of a mellow day, so I decided not to choose a sad book because I didn't know enough about Blood Water Paint to know it's also a sad book. So that was interesting, but I also got some book mail today, which I'll save for my haul that you've probably already seen at this point, but it cheered me up a bit, and this book also cheered me up because it is written beautifully. Now, all of these novels in verse that I've read so far come with content warnings, but this one especially does. So I'll have content warnings for all of the novels in verse that I talk about in this vlog down below in the description box as usual. But yes, this one is amazing. It's based on the true story of an artist who is called Artemisia, and she was a daughter to a very famous artist, but she is the one who did all of the painting, and he just signed his name at the bottom, which, you know, sounds familiar. There's been years and years and years of men taking credit for women work, and it's just dealing so much with the topic of misogyny and how women in this time were just seen as free labor, were just used, abused. And it's also talking a lot about sexual assault in this one. That's one of the main themes, and I'm over halfway and it's already driving home that theme. And it's a very interesting novel in verse because it's not all in verse. There are some prose parts which have to do with stories that are being told, and I think it combines the prose and the novel in verse form so well. And speaking of the poetry part for the novel in verse, I think this is the most beautiful novel in verse writing that I've read of the other ones so far. Not to say that the other ones had like ugly writing or bad writing, but it's a bit more artistic. I think it does lend to the fact that our main character is an artist, so she's talking about, I just love the way she talks about art and her passion for art and how she's painting these pictures with perspectives that are different, because she is a different perspective than all of those male artists. She sees these female portraits that she's doing in a different light than they do, and I think because she's an artist and with the author's writing style, it's just painting such beautiful vivid pictures, and the way that she plays with the words and the way she connects the chapter before with the next chapter with the same kind of word, it's just working so well for me. And this leans more into the type of style that my own novel in verse is, where it's a bit more artistically creative with the poetry side of a novel in verse. I really am loving it. I really like her main character, and I'm interested to see what she's going to do by the end, because she's really trapped in her situation. I don't know if she breaks free or not. I don't know about this artist personally outside of reading this book, but I know as soon as I finish this book, I'm gonna go online and look up some pictures that she's done. I mean, I'll have somebody else's signature on it, but I'll be looking at some of her artwork because I want to see it. I want to see about these beautiful pictures that I'm hearing about in this book. It's heartbreaking, but it's beautifully done. And I've been talking to Cara this morning, Cara from Wild Book Garden. She's literally the reason why I bought a lot of these novels in verse. She's read quite a few. For example, Other Words for Home was her recommendation, Blood, Water, Paint is her recommendation, and Moonrise and Punching the Air, which are both ones that are still on my TBR for this video, are also her recommendations. So the only one that I didn't get from her is the Black Flamingo. And I just realised, like, I should tell Cara that I'm loving these books that she recommended. And I know she's got multiple videos on Blood, Water, Paint, and she's got a review of it as well. So I'll leave a link to her YouTube review where she goes into more detail about this book, because she speaks on it more eloquently than I have done so far. Really loving it. Can't wait to finish it. Hello again. So I'm back because I finished reading Blood, Paint, Water, and it's another favourite. It's another 5 stars. I've read 3 books in this vlog and all of them have been 5 stars, so let's just hope that the next 2 can be as well. This book is very, very emotional, and it deals with such a hard-hitting and difficult subject matter, but it handles it so very well. I would compare this to books like Beartown, but it's a novel in verse, and I think it just did such a good job of looking at all the facets of this case. And it is a case that is historical fiction, so it's set in the past, but the thing that struck me the most about this case was how similar the social circumstances around the subject matter and the law system when it comes to the subject matter still is, how we still fail so much when it comes to talking to victims of these cases, handling the social way that we treat these victims and the way that these victims are cared for, and especially when it comes to whether or not we get justice. Nothing seems to have changed after all these years, and that is a problem. And I appreciate this book for bringing it up to me, because I haven't read that many cases of historical fiction that is based on truth that handles this subject matter. I think it was written beautifully, it was done so well, it pulled on my heartstrings. Cara, you were completely right, I loved it. And there's not really much more I can say right now, except this is a beautiful book and it's one that I really, really recommend, like all of the novels in verse so far. Not sure which of the 2 I'm going to get to next, but I'm excited simply because so far this has just been such a great reading experience and a great reading vlog. I'm going to go and study and then read some adult fantasy before I come back to read more novels in verse. Okay, hello, hi there. This is strange. I haven't filmed standing up since like the early days of my channel, so I feel like I have so much freedom and so much movement and space. But we are continuing this reading novels in verse vlog a few weeks later, because I haven't been reading novels in verse lately. I've been trying to focus on my main TBR. But I'm now 3/4 of the way through Moonrise, and I wanted to tell you about this one because I am feeling, as I have over the course of this vlog, a lot of emotions. So this one is following the family of somebody who has a brother on death row in the United States. So we're following Joe, and his older brother is the one who's on death row, and they are giving a date for his execution. So with this date being given, he's going to travel to the jail and see his brother, and as this is happening, it's bringing up a lot of thoughts, questions, memories, because he hasn't seen or communicated with his brother in a very, very long time. So already it's tackling a very heavy and very difficult topic of death row, and you know, whether that's something you agree with or if it's something you don't agree with. Also, whether a big question in this book is whether Ed has done what he's been accused of or not. And it's just untackling a lot about what imprisonment is like, but also what it's like for the family members of those on who have someone on death row. I feel like that's not something that the media focuses on pretty much at all, and it's not a story that you get to hear very often, so it's definitely a unique take in that. And Joe is of course experiencing and feeling a lot of things. There's a lot of anger in this novel, there's a lot of sadness, but I think one of the main focuses is the injustice of the law system, and also how death row doesn't even benefit the law system itself. So it's bringing a lot of topics to the table, and I'm just reading this one, and compared to the other novels in verses, I feel like this one is the least creative with the novel in verse setup. I'm not saying that it's not a good novel in verse because of that, but it's definitely not playing around with the page that much, and it's definitely not as poetic as the others. It's just telling this story in a very simple form, in a very straightforward form. So it's getting its topics and points across, and it's getting those emotions across, and there's no way you can get confused or lost in any metaphors or images. It's giving it to you, and I think it works well for this one. And I do think there's value in very creatively formatted and such novels in verse, but there's also simplicity and beauty in it just being a straightforward story, but it's just told in verse, and that's what you're getting here. There's no illustrations or such, but then again, I don't think having loads of illustrations around this book would suit the story that it's giving us, and I just think it's doing a very good job with this subject matter. I am angry reading this book. I'm ready to march somewhere, and I finished reading Moonrise by Sarah Crossan, and it took me a bit longer to read the second half than I expected, simply because there were so many times I had to put down this book and feel the emotions. I was so angry and I was so sad, and every time I had to put down the book to think about this situation, it wasn't like this book is so moving, this book is so emotional. It is all of those things, but the main thing that I was thinking when I was reading this book is, these are people's lives. This happens to real people all the time, and it's just so disappointing. You know, we like to think that we're past all of this in history. We like to think we're past all of these beheadings and the gruesomeness, but yet we still have executions happening within the law system in the United States and probably in other places too. Anyway, I was just feeling a lot of things while reading this book, and it was a very emotional journey. I think if you're someone who cries, whether it's at some point in this book you're going to cry, just because the people in this book are dealing with a lot. It's not like me saying the ending is going to be a sad ending. I'm saying at some point you're going to cry from sadness, frustration or anger, if you're a crier. If you're not like me and you're dry-eyed, you'll be crying internally, as I was, because this book serves you a lot of hard truths in verse, and it was another 5 stars. I've had nothing but 5 stars in this vlog, and we have one more book which, if I could do 5-star predictions, I would say is a 5-star prediction. So that's how this vlog is going, but it was absolutely amazing. And I have read a Sarah Crossan book before. I read one by Sarah Crossan when it came out, which is about conjoined twins, and I read it and I thought it was predictable and I thought it was okay, so I kind of just wrote her off. I didn't mean to intentionally, but I just haven't picked up any of her books since then. But I picked this one up on Kara's recommendation. Kara was right again. I think nearly every recommendation I picked up that Kara's given me, it's been 4 or 5 stars. So basically read everything Kara says I should read. That's my goal in life now. I'm gonna wrap this one up with my thoughts on Punching the Air by Zoboi and Yusef Salaam. And this one is about these teenage boys. Well, it follows Amal, who is one teenage boy, and he's just living his life, and then something happens, an altercation happens in his gentrified neighborhood, and he gets imprisoned for something that he did not do, and he feels rage and he feels like his life is over until he starts to discover a love for art. So this is based on a true story, and I think I'm just going to read the book and then get back to you about the true story and my thoughts and feelings, as I will be talking about the true story while talking about this book. Hey there, so I'm halfway through Punching the Air. Well, I'm actually over halfway, and I wanted to discuss it with you. I did say that I would mention about the true story behind this one, which has to do with Yusef Salaam, and he is one of the 5 teen boys who were convicted of a crime that they did not commit, and he was imprisoned when he was 15, I believe, and the 4 other boys were also imprisoned, and it was many years later until they were freed from prison and it was proven that they did not do the crime that they were accused of. So they lost several years of their lives to the imprisonment system on a false conviction. And Yusef Salaam is a poet and he's an activist, and he talks about his experiences, and Punching the Air is absolutely amazing. I'm feeling a lot of things because while it does focus on his imprisonment and what it was like for him in the courtroom, what it is like for him as he comes into this juvenile detention centre for the first time. This is also the first time I'm reading a book set in a juvenile detention centre. I've read some books set in prisons before, but not in the juvenile version, and it's talking about his experience there and also his experience with racism within the system, because yes, there is a lot of racism within prisons and that does affect your experience within prison. It reminds me a bit of Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi in that way, if you want to read some more fiction that has to do with that. But I also am really struck by it talking about his memories, because in this one he brings up the gentrification of his neighborhood and how his neighborhood doesn't belong to him and people like him anymore, as richer white people are moving in and claiming some of the spaces where they felt safe, where they could be themselves. It's also talking a lot about the education system and how, yes, maybe he wasn't connected to his schooling, but he was only being taught by white people and he was not seeing himself in the history lessons. He was not seeing artists like him in the art lessons, and it's just showing how wrong we do some people with the education system. This is not an education system that I relate to. I went to an international school, I studied international history, and it was a lot more open-ended and inclusive. But I know of and have heard of schooling experiences similar to his where it's just not connecting to all the people. It's education that's for a certain type of person, and that needs to be changed within our education system. We need to be doing more to reach more students. And I hate when, as somebody who has worked within schools, I hate when a student is written off as a trouble student and then they just like, oh, that person's trouble, and there's no action taken to connect with the child, to understand the child, to include the child, and that makes me very, very frustrated. So it's interesting to see that part of his life. He's also a Muslim, so he's talking a little bit about religion and faith in this situation, and it's just heartbreaking because we know that he didn't do it, but of course there are people who believe him, there are people who don't believe him, and all of his experiences are tied up to this accusation. I think this is one that does the novel in verse format so well. It's playing with words on the page. It's not got illustrations per se, but it's got, I don't know if you can see, okay, no you can't see, you can only see barely, like darkness and clouding coming into the edges of the pages in some ways to show some of the emotions and like add to it. And there's one thing that really strikes me in this book is the imagery, because I think that in a similar way to Long Way Down uses this image of smoke and a trapped room of an elevator, which is a novel in verse, which I also recommend, and it uses that to emphasize its themes. And in Punching the Air you definitely get a lot of the choking imagery, times that he cannot breathe, where he's imagining being underwater and such. And I think that choking imagery of losing your voice, of not being able to speak, of not even being able to breathe really hits home. And I can't help but think of the murder of George Floyd in relation to this book, so all of it's really adding up to just hit home with my thoughts on this book. I'm gonna finish it and I'll get back to you with my final thoughts and wrapping up this vlog. So I finished reading Punching the Air and it was really, really good. I didn't expect it to end on the tone that it ended on, but I'm glad that it ended on the tone that it ended on, as cryptic as that may be. And I don't really have much to add from what I said before because it kind of keeps going in the same vein and it deals a lot with hope in situations like this. And it was a really moving book, and I really urge you to read the author's note. Both Zoboi and Yusef Salaam have some very important things to say, and I did mention that this was kind of own voices for the experience, but in the author's note Yusef Salaam does make it clear that this is not his story per se, it's inspired by his story, and I think that's an important distinction to make. It was an easy 5 stars, which means that of all of the novels in verse that I read for this vlog, all of them were 5 stars, which is a very good start to doing themed vlogs. Let me know if you like this format and if you like more of it, because I like to read more groupings of books and see if that works for me. I think you can hear the bed creaking every time I move. But I'm going to wrap up this vlog here. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Please let me know if you've read any novels in verse. What is your favourite novel in verse you've read so far? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!